Welcome to this session. So my name's Chris Wilson. I head up marketing for MediaKind. MediaKind are a technology vendor in the video space, and we make end-to-end video solutions for D2C streaming and broadcasting. We're going to be talking today about Minno. So I'd like to introduce Erick from Minno. Maybe Erick, you can give a quick introduction to yourself and the platform.
Yeah, so I'm Erick Goss, the CEO, co-founder of Minno. Minno is a subscription video on demand platform, primarily serving young Christian families, kids 0 to 10.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant, thank you. And that's really the focus of the conversation we're going to have today. So that market is obviously very niche in terms of certainly the subscriber base today and the content itself. And that presents a number of challenges when you're trying to take a service like this to market. So we're going to take a look at some different aspects of this with Erick's help, and then have a look at, okay, so if those requirements, which we need to get to market in the way that you've been looking at doing, what does that mean for the technology platform that you need to build this service on top of? And how can you build a service that's going to give you the right technology to power the growth that you want to achieve? And what you'll see from this conversation, I think, is actually the growth potential is large, and the complexity of where these services need to go is also pretty high. So there's a really interesting dynamic here about how we can take some technology that has been developed for maybe, some of those big logos and big names, but actually apply it here in a really streamlined way to give a platform like Minno the reach that it deserves. So I think first, it would be really interesting for everyone to kind of hear a little bit about your background, since you've actually got a lot of experience in digital and streaming.
Yeah, so just a little background. I went to Naval Academy and studied computer science, was a helicopter pilot and a Pentagon spokesperson. I went to business school at Michigan and had the opportunity to join a company that many people thought was about to go bankrupt called Amazon. So I joined it about 6 months after they went public. So I was probably, there were about 350 people at corporate, and it was just books, music, video. And so when I went in, this was early 2000s, trying to figure out what to do with digital. And I had a real interest in that based on the work that I'd done at business school. And so ended up launching the first ebook business, launching the first print-on-demand business, launched the Amazon credit card, but very interested in digital media. I often look at my time at Amazon based on the quote by Mark Twain that said, "All you need to succeed in life is ignorance and confidence." And so much of what we were doing was for the first time. But was at Amazon for 7 years. I left to be a chief marketing officer for an e-commerce company, and then got involved in faith-based media or Christian media. And originally was home entertainment, DVDs, and curriculum. But as I looked at that, I felt like there was a big opportunity to build a streaming platform.
So maybe just a little bit then, because you spoke about Amazon tried a lot of things for the first time. Yeah, so and we were talking before this about generic versus customized solutions, right? So what were kind of the things you saw work well with Amazon in those early days versus where you felt it could have been done differently?
Yeah, it was very interesting. As soon as I started Amazon, we were in books, and then obviously competing with Borders and Barnes & Noble at the time. And then when you look at the books platform, what adjustments do you have to make that platform to serve music and video? Well, not a lot, because businesses are structured very similarly. The next business we launched was consumer electronics, which was different and had some customization issues, but there was really a sense of an adjacency strategy. I think while I was there, though, it was interesting because we were always thinking, how could we take our generalized solution to enter into specific verticals? And so in some instances, that worked really well. As we go into music, as we go into video, you think about Tower Records, those of you who remember Tower Records. But there were also verticals that didn't work, primarily because we were working with competitors that actually did a much better job of understanding the niche and understanding the specific needs of their customer. A good example is Zappos. Amazon ended up buying Zappos, diapers.com, Amazon ended up buying diapers.com. It is not because Amazon did not invest a lot of money in competing and trying to defeat those companies in the marketplace. It's because they couldn't beat them.
So when we start thinking about that, when you're talking about niche content then, which is really the challenge there, right? You're going after a very specific vertical that needs a lot more around that. How did you start to, because you talk about faith-based media, how did you start to apply some of those learnings towards what now has turned into Minno?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because in the Christian market, if someone has an idea, and again, like most people are like, the Christian market that exists, and oh, that's niche, but it's actually the largest religion on the face of the planet, and the majority of people, if they have a faith tradition or a faith alliance, they are Christian. And so, but it's a market that's poorly aggregated. And so when I entered in that market, I actually ended up working with the co-creator of VeggieTales. Some of you may be familiar with VeggieTales. And so he had started a new IP, and I helped raise the capital for that and commercialize that. DVDs are an amazingly democratizing technology because any of us can shoot something today, burn it to a DVD, and we can become our own distributor. It's awesome. But if in the world of streaming and digital, what happens is the distribution point becomes centralized, therefore there's control. And wherever you have centralization of distribution, you have centralization of capital and financing. And so the real issue is if you can't sell DVDs and you're in Christian children's media, how do I make money? You can't. Unless you have one of the big platforms acknowledge you, because if you then go try to raise private capital, that private capital is dependent on you to be able to find distribution and a way to market, and you can't. And so when I looked at the solution, I essentially recognized I had two options if we wanted to do something in the Christian children's media space. One is we could become a marketing agency, which basically we try to help our creators fund new content, and then it gets licensed or sold to the big platforms, and then we basically spend our own money to actually market that property on their platform and make pennies on the dollar. Bad business model. The other is this audience big enough that we could aggregate it to charge a subscription where actually we could create enough free cash flow where we could create a flywheel, where we could then start investing in content, which would create audience, which then would allow us to have more free cash flow and again invest in audience. The one thing that's interesting about the Christian audience is it has specific challenges and use cases that generalized solutions do terrible jobs serving. And so the way I looked at this is by the time that Netflix or an Amazon or an Apple actually started caring about this audience, I at least had 10 to 15 years. And so can I build a customized solution that serves that audience so well that we actually build strategic moats where it becomes really difficult to compete with us. One quote that I heard from Seth Godin back in the day was, oftentimes you can't outspend or outthink your competition, but you can outlove them. And in this case, what I felt like is we had the ability to love young Christian families in a way that Amazon would never ever consider. I'll give you just one brief example. So within Christian families, one of the things they like to do is have a time of prayer and be in the Bible. And they'll talk about devotions, and typically these are 5 to 10 minutes in length. Well, one of the things we recognize as we talk to customers is they really struggled with their kids because kids were moving around and they didn't want to read, but they loved video. So what could we do to actually create a format? So we created a format called the 5-Minute Family Devotion, which is actually one of the formats we have on our platform that actually drives the highest daily engagement. We can put that first and foremost. It's easy to find. It's super easy and convenient. Try finding that on a Netflix or an Amazon or an Apple platform easily. You can't, and they won't do it because it doesn't make good financial sense for them. And so in the same way you think about the major studios sort of abandoning mid-market films because it's just easier to focus on 12 to 14 big budget films because of the financial opportunity. But really some of those mid-market films historically were really profitable because they didn't cost a lot. In many ways, I kind of look at Minno as an opportunity to build a strong mid-market SVOD platform and be really defensible. And one of the reasons I actually believe that is if you look at Crunchyroll today, for example, it's is anime a bigger niche than Christianity? I don't think so. And yet they've done a better job of aggregating that audience and creating a world-class streaming service. And so, my hypothesis was, in the same way that Crunchyroll or say BritBox can go out and build a streaming platform because of the specific needs of that audience, we can do that too.
So we kind of talked then about, you got 70% of your platform then kind of sits around a generic delivery, but then you've got this additional piece, which actually for you sounds, it's highly customized, right? Because you have very specific requirements for delivering that content. There's probably different demographics in your audience base that you need to serve differently. So when did you start kind of looking at the technology as being something that you could use to enable this? Instead of just going and buying an off-the-shelf OVP or something and just running with best effort, when did you start looking at the technology as being a real underpinning for the direction you wanted to go in?
Yeah, I think the way we were thinking about it is, because I did a minimal viable product business called Jelly Telly, and we used one of the large streaming platforms. And what I recognized was we were locked in. like how do I get out of that, and how do we have operational flexibility? And so the question then was, okay, what can we do if we're going to switch from this OVP to another one? What do we do to avoid lock-in? So we then started building out custom APIs that allow us to kind of work with third-party services. And even then, because we were cash-strapped, we actually used very, I would say, more bare bones players and OVPs for the purpose of delivery. But what we do is we build customizations on top of them. The problem is when you start managing 9 different apps on 9 different platforms, those customizations become really, really difficult to maintain. And so what we recognized is we need to find a solution that is 70-80% generalized, because we're not doing anything that's any different than any of the major platforms. The challenge is, what does it mean to build that customization where there's certain things that we know that our audience wants that these generalized platforms don't? The other thing is we want to maintain our brand identity, because one of the things in the Christian world, so if I say we're a Christian media company, the first thought from a brand standpoint is, oh, mediocre. And one of the things that we've really done is set a high bar so that our branding, our logo, everything looks world class. One of the best compliments we always get is like, I didn't even know you're a Christian company. And so we're like, awesome. And so what does it mean for us to have a solution and platform in place that can be world-class while at the same time build that customization? There's one sense where it sounds like that's an easy problem to solve, but it's not. So, we probably looked at 12 different vendors, and it was really, really difficult to find what we were looking for that could be cost-effective within the budget that we wanted to deploy.
Yeah, and it's that baseline, isn't it? It's being able to know confidently that you're going to be able to deploy on all these devices and with all these apps, and those will run. But then there's enough flexibility somewhere in the platform to be able to customize highly for what you're trying to achieve with those different audiences.
Yeah, one thing I'll just mention with that is I find a lot of entrepreneurs and CEOs really think, oh, this project's going to be amazing. And they never think about, okay, what is the total cost of ownership, and basically what does maintaining and managing it look like? And that was really important, because we saw some things that were really sexy and really exciting. But when I looked at what the ongoing maintenance and management of it to be able to be competitive, it just didn't make sense.
No. And especially, as you said, like when you have all these different integration points and third parties coming in, it really slows down your ability to do new things, I think, number one, but also it's a huge cost burden on yourself to maintain that.
Yes.
And have your roadmap tied up at the whim of however many vendors you've got in your ecosystem.
Yeah, because you then find yourself in a situation, and again, part of it is you have to figure out what your technology strategy is. But for us, what we recognized is we are not going to be a technology-led company, we're going to be a technology-enabled company. That doesn't mean that we don't have technology competency on staff, but we really need to look at what we can do to curate the best of, and it'll be the curation and the integration where we're going to actually find our technology advantage. And so what can I do to curate and aggregate the best technologies for the specific needs of my audience? And to your point, you start thinking about what's my cost? Do I want to hire software developers to do this? If I do that, then what quality of software developers am I hiring? And then can I actually be a talent magnet for the type of folks that I'm going to need for scaling long term? And our belief was it's going to be really difficult for us at the size of business we are today to do that. But like 10 years from now, that may be a very different scenario.
So you're aiming for Netflix size then?
I'll go for Crunchyroll right now.
So just because I want to touch on, there's a really interesting, we were discussing this before the panel, right, about the future ambitions, right, where you see you not only being able to deploy your video content, but also how you can package your platform for different parts of your market. But I want to touch on something first, which I think is really interesting for a niche content market: pricing. And you spoke to me yesterday, I think it was, no, this morning, about your audience kind of coming to you and almost saying that yeah, it's okay, you can.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a weird space because, I mean, I would say within the Christian audience, there's a demographic that they really look at this as an investment in my children, and this tends to be more upper middle class, and then there's more kind of lower to middle class. They're more like very much more cost conscious. If you look at our platform right now, our average income is above 6 figures, and when we do pricing studies, what's interesting is people say, you know, we would actually like to see you charge more so you can actually make investments and give us better content. Now again, most people would say the fact that your customers actually care about the business, like, are you kidding me? But I would say that is the benefit of a great niche, is you actually are co-creating this business in partnership with your subscribers and with your customers. And so they want to see you win. And that's what's been so great for us, is because our customers, they know, they see the intentionality in what we're doing, both from our content and from our technology execution. They want to see us win. And so that does give us, quote unquote, pricing power. Yeah. I mean, we look at that gingerly, because we're stewards of that, because there's a sense of what is this balance between optimizing free cash flow and building a great business while at the same time being as accessible to as many people as possible.
Yeah. But I think that kind of says, you know, you get that model right for the niche that you're moving into, and you build their loyalty, you build the trust, which you have to do through a combination of technology and how you market and how you interact with them. You can actually end up in a pretty strong position in terms of how you're viewed by your audience. And that is pretty amazing when you look at the streaming market in general, with all of these different apps appearing and these big players who are kind of in a pricing war sometimes with each other. And yet you're sat there and you've got this really dedicated audience that you can serve. Now obviously it's in your court to serve them well and serve them right. And I guess that helps to reinforce that trust. But maybe to the next question then, like, you know this audience, so you've got this great audience here. You want to start, you know what they need, you know how they like to consume your content. And we have a platform that helps to build the foundation of that. What's next in terms of how you take those packages out, beyond maybe just pure video streaming service?
Yeah, so this is where I think we were really excited to partner with MediaKind and thinking about platform evolution and roadmap. So when you look at the global Christian streaming market, not every territory is going to be great for subscription video on demand. And so we've looked at, you know, when we look at expanding globally, would we use advertising video on demand? And what, you know, historically we would think, okay, we've got to get the developers to kind of build this capability out. And then with MediaKind, it was just built in as we think about a fast channel. But as also, one of the things we're thinking about is actually launching audio on our platform, leveraging the MediaKind platform. And so, again, these are things that you typically wouldn't think about. But because of our niche, because it's children's and there's an education component, there's also the ability for us to have a children's ministry or a Sunday school curriculum program for churches, but then also for Christian schools and homeschoolers. And so we have the flexibility with the platform. Historically, we would be building those features on top of a bare bones OVP, but with MediaKind, there's so much intelligence built into that platform, it gives us the ability to actually deploy our software development resources in different areas where we're not sort of recreating the wheel, but it also gives me as the CEO strategic optionality in a way that I've never had. And so if my board or our management team says, well, let's go and do AVOD, historically, I think there's like a 12 to 18 month lead in to kind of what to do just from a technology standpoint. Now what I recognize is we've got that optionality from a technology standpoint. It's more about, okay, let's get the business concerns addressed, like advertisers and audience strategy, but technology is there enabling us to make good strategic decisions versus being a deterrent or an obstacle.
Yeah, and I think that is almost a bit of, that probably the foundation that you've built can cope with some of these different models that you want to go after, but it allows you to then take your time and adapt as you need to.
Well, and so much of what we're having to do is test our way into greatness. I'm a huge fan of Peter Drucker, and he would say, there's who you think you are, and then there's who the market tells you who you are. And I think what I feel good about in regards to risk mitigation, because so much of actually what you're doing as a startup is mitigating risk, we can go in a different direction and nothing feels fatal right now. Yeah. Like in regards to streaming video, we've got optimal optionality relative to the basket or the portfolio of options we think we need for the purpose of serving our audience well.
Yeah, and are you worried then, or do you feel then the situation you're in that actually you can probably move fast into a new area if you needed to, and either pull back if it doesn't work without too many problems, or grow from there, right? It sounds like you've got that flexibility to try a number of different access into different markets.
Completely. Yeah. I mean, so much of what we do right now as we think about technology strategy reminds me of naval warfare strategy, which is you need to know the ranges of your missiles, you need to know the range of your ships and your submarines, and the resources required to keep that supply chain working. And it's on the basis of that you can actually start developing your strategy, because that actually creates the strategic limits of what you can do. The other thing is the number of tests that you run is really based on how much in regards to capital or talent that you have that you can deploy and figure it out. I mean, one of the things I learned at Amazon is if you have cheap capital and world-class talent, you will eventually figure it out. Not everybody is in a similar situation where they have access to cheap capital and access to world-class talent. So then it's really, okay, what can I do to build the best test and experiment engine that I can for maximizing the value for my specific audience?
No, that's interesting. And that's where, and again, we spoke about this before, right? Tech is a catalyst. So the technology there, that a technology-enabled company means you can adapt and move fast and test and try. Right?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, technology is invisible.
Yeah.
Because it's essentially, I think about this from a platform standpoint. When we're serving our customers, granted, I love it when they say, man, your app is amazing. But the reality is, the content's the show. And so you don't want people to come in and go, man, I really like this theater, but really the show's not very good. You want it to be just kind of the opposite. In the same way for my management team, as they're thinking about strategic options and we're talking about these things at an offsite, recognizing that we don't have to put a lot of time and effort and thinking about technology limitations is hugely freeing to the team. And also recognizing there's not going to be a huge capital expenditure for the purpose of testing a feature because we've got that built in already into the platform we're already using.
No, that's great. That's a really good kind of way to round that off, because I think the goal for any technology platform and service is to be invisible. And allow you to tell the stories you want to do, and also to concentrate on what's important to your business which is not necessarily managing and solving the technology problem.
Yes.
So we've got 50 seconds left. I wanted to see if there are any questions from anybody. Obviously, you can come down and talk to Eric or myself at the end, but yes, please.
Hi, Rajiv here from Blogcast. So one of the things that I have an interest in is understanding how audiences grow. And in your case, the fact that you have a very clear niche in terms of your audience, and I'd like to hear something from you about how you manage that growth of audience, especially because as a Christian organization, you probably do a lot of, have a lot of your growth coming from outreach activities around community groups. So I would expect your growth to be very bursty within individual communities as someone discovers it, and then it catches on with their groups, their churches, and things like that. How does that impact how you plan your scale?
Sure, I can answer that. So the key question is, how do we grow and how do we think about growth within a specific niche? And it's the single biggest problem for platforms. And so I'm actually an adjunct professor at Vanderbilt's Business School that teaches online marketing. And so this is like my wheelhouse. And so I would like to say that you can do community outreach, but the reality is, as you're a niche platform, you don't, so community outreach, and anytime people are involved, you have to have staff. And staff is taking on a fixed expense. Programmatic advertising is awesome because it's probably the most efficient medium that we've had, in the history of marketing. That's why Facebook and Instagram and Meta have done so well. But for a niche, you have to figure out what does it mean for, because discovery is the number one problem. Conversion is an easier problem because someone knows you, they're searching for you, or you can actually retarget, remarket. And so for us, what's interesting is YouTube is really important because YouTube is the single biggest platform for children's media, but is also what I would say probably the largest platform for children's pastors to actually find videos that they want to show on Sunday mornings. And so we actually discovered kind of, oh, there's really something here. I'm a former Amazon guy, so the idea of putting my exclusive content onto YouTube is like heretical. Like, it took me a long time to get there. But what I recognize is, like, right now we've got original content on YouTube where we're getting anywhere between 2 to 3 million views per week. We've had almost 100 million views over the last 12 months. That traffic is then set up for retargeting and remarketing to kind of drive over. The other is, instead of community outreach, I would say we work with influencers. And so you have to find those people that trust. And so specific niches is all about trust management and going where they are, and then figuring out what is the most efficient way to do that at scale. Now, I am thinking about community outreach, like what does it mean for us to work with churches, or what does it mean to work with schools? But anyone who's done direct-to-consumer and then thinks about doing a direct-to-business recognizes they're completely different operational problems. And so as I look at that, I'm like, is now the right time that I'm willing to go slow, but recognize that this can scale? The benefit of that type of problem and that type of solution, it's really, really difficult for competition to replicate. And so if you can figure out that type of outreach solution with specific niches, you actually are building a strategic moat. And I shared this comment earlier is, one of the things I learned from Jeff Bezos is, oftentimes we'd be in meetings and someone would say, well, man, that's really hard. He goes, awesome. That means no one else will try it. And so the key is understanding when is a hard thing, the time to invest for the purpose of building strategic moats, and when is the right time not to do it. What you find is most businesses like to do what they did yesterday. They don't want to necessarily have to do what's required for tomorrow. And that was one of the things I learned from Jeff was he's very willing to invest in tomorrow in a way that builds massive strategic moats for the business in the future.
That's great. That's a really good answer. Any other questions? Great. Well, yeah, that was excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Eric. It was great.